Here we go. Grayson Grundhoefer has been a busy man. All of the recruiting and camps and visits and all that kind of stuff. And then also yesterday, Baylor started their practice, and he had a bunch of nuggets up on his Twitter feed and also on the site. Grayson, thanks for your time. One of the notes, and I texted you about this maybe even last night, you had a note about Baylor and how many players now they have on the roster that weigh 300 pounds or more. Is that just recruiting bigger bodies, or some of those guys became monstrous during strength and conditioning?
Right. I mean, it's kind of a mixture, right? Because if you kind of look up and down the roster, you'll see some familiar names who have put on some weight, but then also you'll see, guys that Baylor went after in the transfer portal to try to, add some size and some depth, especially on the offensive line, because I think it becomes pretty apparent what you saw last year at times where guys just, look small. And I mean, I don't know exactly why that happened, but it is what it is. It's just what happened. And in certain matchups, they just got completely overpowered. And I know it was most of the matchups, but I think there were specific ones like the Texas one where it just was like you had no chance because you simply were not big enough on the interior of the offensive line. So, yeah, you're exactly right. So Baylor has 17 players who weigh over 300 pounds now, 12 offensive linemen, including 10 of them who are over 310 pounds, which is massive. And then they also have 5 defensive linemen over 300 pounds, with 2 of those being over 320 pounds. And I thought the biggest thing that, when I texted you that, because I actually, didn't really go through much of, last year's roster, but I believe there were 8 guys who I sent you who were in that group of 12 offensive linemen from last year who were over 300 pounds. And most of them didn't play. There were like 7 of the 12 hardly played at all or only played limited amount of snaps. So I think you kind of get an idea of where Baylor is at now. And if guys can stay healthy through the course of fall camp, I think they're going to be much bigger on both sides of the trenches, which will be, absolutely massive, I think, towards them having a big bounce back here.
Grayson, obviously, you don't get to see much in the first day of practice, but you mentioned those linemen and how big they are. They're not hitting yet and all that. Do you think that they have an idea who the starting 5 is, or given the fact that they've had guys had to medically retire and out for the year, that this is, kind of up for grabs in about 3 positions?
Right. It's really, I think it's really hard at this point to pinpoint exactly who will be starting on the offensive line for Baylor. I think that they're really trying to develop a culture, I think, of competition, right? And that's something they haven't had. A lot of guys were, I don't want to say handed starting spots, but it was just like, okay, this guy's the starter, and then we're just kind of just building around them. And I think Baylor this year really wants it to be very open at every position. And I think they've been pretty honest about that. I mean, you're seeing it with the quarterback battle. You're seeing it at, various other positions as well. So I'm not sure they have anything exactly set in stone. I do think that you can probably, guess that, a guy like Alvin Ebasele is probably going to start at left tackle. I think that's one that's relatively locked in. But outside of that, I mean, there's a lot up for grabs. Chattanooga transfer Colin Truitt was actually working at center, so he's going to be pushing Colton Price, who showed flashes last year. But there's going to be some competitions there at center. You saw at left guard, they went out and got Sidney Fugar from South Carolina and Colton Thomason from Texas A&M. So those 2 guys are both working at guard. I think Thomason's also going to get some looks at tackle as well. But those are 2 big bodies. I mean, Fugar came in 6'5", 341 pounds, which is just, that's different than anyone they have on their roster. And then Colton Thomason is 6'8", 312 pounds. So his height is obviously very apparent as well. So 2 big guys with a lot of size and have some familiarity in the SEC as well. So, they're used to some intense competition. So I still think it's a work in progress, but they're getting there. And I think they're in a much better spot when it comes to depth at this point compared to where they were for sure last year.
So we just had some interesting breaking news within the last 20 minutes, as I'm sure you've seen. Baylor coming out with an announcement, joint decision. The Bears and Gary Patterson have decided to sever their offseason partnership where he was serving in an analyst-like role. And Grayson, I asked Dave Aranda for more specifics on how that was going to work during the season a month ago at Big 12 Media Days, and he was kind of evasive at the time, but I guess we just walked away knowing that Gary wasn't going to be involved on game days. Now he's not involved any longer to any degree. What do you think when you saw the news, and was this something you were perhaps expecting and heard whispers of, and just what are your thoughts on any potential impact or lack thereof that comes with Gary Patterson moving along and Baylor moving along as well?
I mean, I suppose there were maybe faint whispers. I do think that, what you mentioned at Big 12 Media Days was pretty, revealing. I think that, he wasn't going to really be a part of game days. And I mean, if he's not going to be a part of game days, and the season is a month away, then, I mean, this kind of makes sense, right? He spent this time with the Baylor program, helped out the defense, helped out the secondary specifically, and provided his knowledge and intelligence to that unit leading into fall camp. And I think that was invaluable and something that, probably really, really helped a lot of those players develop throughout the offseason. So I think that this is just one of those things that probably makes sense for both sides. And, I don't know how much Gary, is really going to do a ton of coaching going forward, but I'll be curious to see kind of if he tries to end up somewhere else or if he takes this year off. But in general, I think my first reaction to this, I guess all the people on Twitter who were saying that Gary Patterson is going to be the next Baylor coach were pretty wrong on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I know you were there, and I made a couple notes about DeQuan Finn, and Aranda was asked about him at the end of practice yesterday. A question for you: do you feel like they have not named a starter because both of them are pretty good, or that they're both up and down, a little bit erratic?
I think this has everything to do with Sawyer Robertson making a jump in the spring. And I do believe that it is more so about both guys playing well. I think that, you have two guys that are very different in how they play, yet also they do have some similarities. Sawyer Robertson showed last year, he's very good at designed runs. When you run him up the middle, kind of like they did against West Virginia, he's got great size at 220 pounds. He can absorb contact. He can get you short yardage, and he's a good athlete. And so you don't get to see that much in practice. And like with DeQuan Finn, you don't get to see him in the open field and the kind of speed that he possesses and that kind of, difference-making ability. And so I think both have been held back a little bit because they're not really hitting the quarterbacks for obvious reasons. But I do think both guys have shown flashes of, who they are and kind of what they bring to the table for Baylor. And I think they both are doing a nice job. I also think that this goes right in line with what I talked about earlier about Baylor trying to create a culture of competition at every single position. So I think this has been really good for both of them to be able to just compete every single day and not have, the job announced, because now it's giving them an opportunity to sit there and think, okay, I can still be the guy, on that first game. So again, I think it's just creating that culture, but I do believe it's been more so about both guys performing well and specifically Sawyer just taking a nice step forward in the spring.
This segment with Grayson Grundhoefer brought to you by Richard Carr, Buick GMC Cadillac, the Baylor Bear Hotline, people you can count on.
Grayson, how's the indoor facility and all that's looking? I know they're still working on it, still trying to finish everything, but I hadn't been out there in quite a while, and I don't think you had either. So what's it all kind of just looking like?
It looks great. I mean, you can kind of see the sky bridge, looks complete, and I think that drops you into the weight room. So you can get from the weight room to the indoor facility, indoor practice field through that sky bridge. So that looks much more apparent than I think it did a few months ago, Craig, when we were looking at it, we're like, all right, where's this bridge going to be? Mm-hmm. But now it's kind of all come together and you can definitely kind of see it and kind of what they have for that. I know, I think some guys were able to see the weight room on their junior day visit. I think that was the only thing that's like really where you can kind of see exactly what it's going to look like, because it's, it's not complete, like everything's not moved in, but I think you can really see kind of what the space looks like. There's some other places that just aren't quite finished yet. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be done by the end of this month. So we'll see if they're able to kind of wrap things up. But yeah, it does look really nice. You can see the front door entrance, which you couldn't see in the past. You can see it from the practice field. So that was kind of nice to see as well. So yeah, it's definitely coming together. It's looking really, really good.
So we know Baylor, and you've been all over it. It has been hot on a heater, in fact, when it comes to recruiting. They had the one flip that to TCU, a defensive lineman. Anything else around the horizon? You feel like there's going to be maybe a slow trickle, or what else is on your radar with Baylor?
Yeah, I mean, this was another really good week. I mean, getting Matthew Parker, the offensive lineman out of Mississippi, to flip from Vanderbilt. And then, of course, the big one being Caleb Burns, the Texas Tech commit to flip to Baylor as well. Those were two guys that Baylor had really prioritized. They got both on campus this past weekend for BIB Day. They were able to flip both of them. So that was kind of a nice close to what has just been an outrageous July. I mean, just a lot of fireworks in July, and that was great to see. Turning the page to August, there's a few guys that have decisions upcoming, which I think Baylor is, a part of. When you look at Kilgore, 4-star cornerback Jaden Sanders, he's supposed to be making his commitment decision on August 10th. That's one that Baylor's still in on, along with TCU and Michigan. Still very much a battle there. And then also, like you mentioned, Brody Watley decommitting and flipping to TCU. Seems like that opens up some room on the defensive line. A guy that I'm looking at there is Denton Guyer, defensive lineman Xavier Akponu. He's got over 35 offers, has a really, really nice offer list from schools like LSU, Arkansas, Florida, Miami, Oklahoma, Oregon. And he's the guy who's making a decision on August 5th between Wisconsin, Baylor, and SMU. I think this is going to be a battle. I think Baylor's trying to make a push here. They got the whole staff talking to him. They got, just it feels like they're really trying to make a push for him going into that date. So that'll be an interesting one to watch for sure. Outside of that, I could see them landing a few more guys, in this month, especially early in fall camp as guys are trying to, really solidify things. I'm really curious to see if maybe they're able to make some move with some flip guys potentially, and see if they're able to really, just kind of complete what has been a really, really impressive summer.
I have to bring this up, Grayson, because you and I did have this conversation, I think yesterday evening, about the rating system. There are 3, 4, 5 different places that rate players. And I've always been a belief, even when like Max Empfinger was the only one doing it, that it was just almost impossible to do it. But these companies have gotten bigger and expansive. But you told me, did I hear you right, that Taz Williams, after he committed to Baylor, had a couple of different sites drop him just below the 4-star level? And how often does that happen? Because if he had been a Baylor commit and then committed to Auburn or LSU or Texas, would it have been the opposite?
Right. I think it's one of those weird situations where, a guy has 50-plus offers and you're kind of looking around and going, okay, well, this offer list is really, really good. And the good news for him is he is still a 4-star prospect, but it just continues to lower and lower. And that's one of those things that you definitely keep an eye on. 247's had him at an 89 rather consistently. He was at an 88 for a while, and he's been stuck at an 89. But for him to not be a 4-star, again, is a little crazy. I think on any site to not have him as a 4-star, and I know On3 is kind of in that same boat. I think they have him as an 88 as well. So he's just a shade below that, and it's just like, okay, he's got 50-plus offers from all the blue bloods, and then you look around at some other guys who, are committed to schools, and their best offer is UTEP. And it just really doesn't make a lot of sense how that correlates. That's basically saying that, blue blood schools don't evaluate as well as, UTEP does. And maybe that's true in some cases, but for it to be consistent is rather crazy. I've had my issues with 247 and with, all the recruiting sites at times, mainly when you see guys that have really good offer lists and they get kind of just lost in the shuffle. The one that I always come back to is Colton Siraki last year, who had Nebraska, Purdue, Kansas, TCU, Texas Tech, and SMU offers. And he was ranked as the number 296 prospect in the state, behind guys committed to Fresno State, Tulsa, Texas State, UTEP, North Dakota State, Stephen F. Austin, Tennessee State, Houston Baptist, and the list goes on. I mean, that's really, really bad, and at times I have issues with that because offers do matter at the end of the day.
Thank you, Grayson. Appreciate it. Man, he has been hammering out the information on SicEm365.com and also weekly on Tuesdays with Craig with the Bearcast.